everyone. My name is Tatsuya Mano, and it's my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce the next plenary speaker, Dr. Binbin Li. Dr. Binbin Li is the Associate Professor at Duke Kunshan University and also holds an appointment with the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke University. She focuses on the synergy between biodiversity conservation and sustainable development under climate change. Dr. Li has been awarded Wayfinder by National Geographic and inaugural EC50 by Explorers Club. He is the co-editor-in-chief of Integrative Conservation and serves as the co-chair of International Union for Conservation of Nature, WCPA Protected Planet Specialist Group. She has also been awarded Nature Photographer of the Year in the Chinese National Geography China Wildlife Image and Video Competition in 2022. Congratulations. And she's the founder of the China Anti-Bird Collision Action Alliance, the largest citizen science project in China. She's also the board director of Silver Lining Conservation Center, which aims to increase the capacity of storytelling for conservation practitioners and to change public behaviors using media instruments. So now, please welcome Dr. Binbin Li.
All right, good morning, everyone. 大家早上好. So it's my great honor to be here, and to be honest, I read the invitation letter twice to make sure it is not a new type of scam targeting the desperate conservation research community. I'm glad it is true, and I have the opportunity to share some of the work we have done like in China. And especially relate to this question that hanging around in my mind all the time when we need to go out and talk to the other communities about why it is important to protect biodiversity, is that can we achieve synergy between biodiversity conservation and the sustainable development? So glad Ricky has mentioned very important targets for our global biodiversity framework, especially relate to Target 3, protecting 30% of the land and water by 2030. However, when we go to a lot of places, especially this rural area with the local governments, there's a lot of pushback and resistance because people think putting protected areas will obstruct the local community development. So that is one question that we always have, is that true? And I think a lot of the time is maybe we did not compare apples to apples. Where we put protected areas are in these rural, high altitude, cold, arid places that actually also restrict the development of the local communities. So we want to understand if we look at what has been done, is that true? We have a trade-offs between protected area effectiveness and local community development. So what we did is we compared the pixels from different protected areas all over the world and to the counterfactual places in the same country, in the same ecosystem, but how does protected area do in reducing the natural land cover loss? At the same time, and we see that globally, actually protected areas is effective in reducing the natural land cover loss compared to the places that haven't been protected. But at the same time, we're also looking at the neighboring communities of the protected areas. We use nightlight as a proxy for infrastructure expansion and also economic growth, and compare their changes to the places that not being protected or not being influenced by the protected area for the communities. And actually, there's no significant difference between the nightlight change of the neighboring communities of the protected areas versus the areas having been influenced by protected areas. In other words, protected area does not obstruct the potential economic growth of these local communities. So if we pair the outcomes of protected areas and also the outcome of local community economic growth in 4 ways, if we see the co-benefits, we call that synergy, actually it accounts for 48% of the global protected areas that we analyze. However, there are also trade-offs and also lose-lose situation. If putting them together, it's more than 50%. So it really depends where you are, but one promising part is synergy, the co-benefits, like outcome, is not that scarce. But there is geographic and bomb heterogeneity in this. If we look at the distribution of 4 different relationships of the protected areas across the globe, we see there are some places that have more of the synergy, but also we want to point out there are places which they have received like these trade-offs or lose-lose. For example, the grasslands in South America rank among the top for the percentage of retreat. Amazon and Southeast Asia have more economy-impaired cases. So depend on the context, sometimes we have the perception of trade-offs is true at the same time. But what factors could influence the probability of synergy? And compared to protected area or the environmental conditions, socioeconomic conditions have a more important role in predicting the probability of synergy. To be specific, for example, Human Development Index of a country, the local GDP condition before the protected area was established, and also the market access and the density of roads. They all play a very important role. However, I want to point out, if we do not solve the poverty issue, for example, if you look at the first figure of GDP, and with the low GDP, there is a very low probability of getting to the synergy outcome. If we do not solve the poverty issue of the local community, we won't expect the protected area could benefit from having the conservation there, or to see the local economy could take off by itself. And not just looking at economic growth, we also want to understand if we can create more synergy by looking at the global challenges. And actually, a lot of these challenges share the common drivers. For example, climate change, land cover change, and overexploitation, they all drive biodiversity loss, natural disasters, zoonosis diseases related to human health. And in identifying these common drivers, we can identify synergy in solutions. And I want to use landslides as a way to demonstrate that. And for example, this is a picture that I took in the mountainous area of China. And landslides have become more and more frequent in current days. And there are 2 major drivers for that. The first one, deforestation, infrastructure, construction, mining accounts for 16% of the fatal landslides globally. And especially high mountain Asia, with climate change, more extreme precipitation, we're expecting to see 30 to 70% more of the increase in landslides. So the 2 major drivers, land cover change and climate change, also are the drivers for biodiversity loss. So if we look at the spatial overlap, and we can see, first, there is a positive correlation between the small range species richness, no matter it's mammals, birds, or amphibians, with the landslide susceptibility. And they concentrate in certain mountain ranges. And for these mountain ranges, which are not well protected and expect to have further land cover loss and also extreme precipitation in the future, they're expecting to see more of the landslides. So we can identify the priority mountain ranges for this kind of synergetic solution, because by protecting the natural vegetation and also doing restoration, it can help to have the healthy root system to stabilize the slope at the same time. So protecting the nature not only provides the habitat for biodiversity, but at the same time, it can reduce landslides, this kind of natural disaster, which we are going to see more and more in the context of climate change, and reduce the potential socio-economic impacts for the local residents at the same time. And there's a nice study done by Grima et al. And showing in Andes, forest restoration is 16 times more cost-effective than repairing damaged infrastructure. So we can use nature to solve some of the problem. But at the same time, we need to see there is trade-offs between biodiversity and the other interventions of the global challenges. For example, food production, climate change, and human health. And this picture showing the wind farms, like in the States, and it happens in China as well. And for the expansion of renewable energy to tackling the climate change problem, and we may threaten like the habitat and also the natural forest, protecting biodiversity. So I will encourage you to go to one of the poster sessions by Zhijie and Su to look at one of the projects we're doing right now, how the China's 2060 carbon neutrality goal may have a trade-offs of the biodiversity conservation in China. But I want to point out the trade-offs exist, especially under the current financial input constraints. We need to find synergy of that. And a lot of times people may say, let's just plant trees, but trees are not enough. We need to look beyond the canopy or under the canopy. What is under the canopy? Pandas. I will use pandas as a way to demonstrate we need to look at species data. And China government has put a lot of resources to protect the natural habitat of GM pandas. However, there is another type of threat surpassing logging and agriculture become the most prevalent human disturbances in panda habitat. That is livestock grazing, and they eat bamboos. So these pictures show under the beautiful primary forest, we had the lush bamboo forest underneath before livestock grazing become a problem. However, just after 10 years of overgrazing, and these lush bamboo forests are dying, and then you can only see the stems, the browning of this like bamboo forest. And 40% of the plots that we have surveyed have no bamboo shoots at all, and the shooting rate is only 1/5 of the normal shooting rates. And more importantly, not just for food, and we also figured out, which is led by Binbin and Tina, they have found like the livestock physics reduce the exploration behaviors of GM pandas, further restrict their spatial use because they need that kind of behavior and then to go to different places and explore like the food and also home. And for the protected area that we have this long-term study, there is a 94% of net loss of habitat use by giant pandas. And we use pandas as an umbrella species, so what about the other taxa? And globally, like livestock grazing in forests is not a rare cases. And plants, medium to large mammals, and also soil have a negative impact coming from the livestock grazing. But also there are heterogeneity like in the response, especially from medium, large mammal. And I will encourage you to go to Hanju's session this afternoon to look at more of the details. But why are there more livestock in the forest? It's not a productive like ecosystem for raising livestock. And there is a nice study done by my colleague, Dr. Li Sheng from Peking University. They have shown that the top predators have been lost from most of the GM panda habitats. So what if you do not have leopards? If you do not have this like top like predators? And then for local community, it's relatively easy, and then they can put their livestock free ranging in the forest without worrying they can be eaten by these top predators. So in order to test whether that change could make a difference for the household level decisions, we did this comparison study between China and India and choosing the healthy tiger and leopard habitat in India. And as you can see, the top like variable here. And in India, the predation loss actually significantly reduced the number of livestock that a household would like to raise. But because of the predation loss is so low in China, actually it made no difference for how many livestock a household would like to have. So we can see livestock, they can cause a difference, and for the vegetation themselves by influencing the interaction of the wildlife community. But at the same time, the change in the ecological system, the loss of predators, also changed the social system by deciding how many livestock they would like to have in the social system, which in turn could influence the ecological system as well. However, that is just one typical habitat of GM pandas, but now we're looking at a much bigger picture, which is the GM Panda National Park. So the national park in China is a new thing. Previously, we have the nature reserve systems, and we only have 5 official GM Panda national parks in China, and GM Panda National Park is one of them. Different from the other national park systems in other countries, the national park in China is very ambitious. As you can see, just one park, it is 22,000 square kilometers and covering about 73 previously protected areas that we have established. And it covers 60% of the panda habitat, 72% of the panda population. But more importantly, there are 120,000 residents living within this park. So can we just say, let's ban livestock? We have banned logging, we have banned the agriculture on the steep slope in some areas of China. If we ban livestock, we'll push that kind of natural resources use need to another type of natural resources. It's not the only way or right way to go for some of the places. So we need to consider, is there a more sustainable way of managing the livestock within the giant panda habitats? So doing that not only needs science, we also need to look at the communities who manage the natural resources together. By increase the trust, share vision, and conflict resolution, and also agree on the rules, we can have improved ecological conditions. If we say, using science, we can understand where to have livestock, how many you should have, and what time you should put the livestock in the forest. And maybe by linking markets, we can have an increase like price for this type of practices. What if there are free riders coming into these areas, try to take advantage of this scheme? And if we want to enforce that from the outsider's perspective, from the park perspective, it may be very costly and not effective. But if the enforcement is coming within the community and to look after the natural resources, it will be more effective. How can we encourage this kind of collective actions? If you have done household survey, you will know if you go into different households and then building trust and ask them, would you like to do that? Sometimes you get the answer may not reflect their true thoughts. And we're also trying to use different tools, and by looking at, okay, what if we use public goods game and trying to understand how private risk, collective risk, and expectation of peer contributions and trust may influence their community collaboration. And actually one specific thing stands out, which is the collective risk. If we can help to reduce the financial risk for this kind of collective actions, that will encourage more of the voluntary collaboration between the community members. So that is one thing the national park could help to do, and then to encourage co-ops or the other kind of community-based management. So now we're having some pilot sites and trying this community-based monitoring and management by engaging the local community to be the major action force. So by increase the trust and also build these interactions between the peers in the local communities, we can help to resolve some of the problems. And gladly, some of the changes have been incorporated in the recent policies by providing compensation and job opportunities and encourage more of the local community engagement in the giant panda national park. And this is part of the story of wilderness. We're trying to protect some of the wilderness. But outside the wilderness, we also have productive landscape. And I want to show the second story by showing this photo, which is tea plantation. And because of the increase of demand for tea, actually tea plantation have been expanded not only in China, but also in some of the other countries. And in China, the tea plantation majorly concentrate on the southern part of China. And where I point out is the traditional tea farming, and which is mainly in Yunnan, where also we have a lot of the biodiversity. And what is traditional tea farming? And actually, people protect the forest above by planting trees, by planting the tea trees underneath. They're not densely planted. The red circle shows one of the tea trees. And they're not intensively managed, and they can grow to tree size. So as we know, if we have more of the canopy cover and complex forest structure, we can have higher biodiversity. But at the same time, we have a reduction in tea production. But what's interesting is China really pay attention to the tea and its quality and flavor. There is an increased flavor with the increasing canopy coverage, but at the same time, because of flavor is better, there's an increase in price for that as well. So which is different from the livestock like case where we try to build a market with higher price for like better practices, but this one, they already have a market for that. So I would encourage you to go to City session and directly looking at how we want to develop biodiversity-friendly tea and in Yunnan, but at the same time using this scheme to encourage the restoration of terrace tea to create sustainable productive landscape, especially to make the landscape more permeable between protected areas. So use this as a way to create the synergy. So by protecting some wilderness, and then we may drive some of the production outside the protected area and make this kind of landscape less sustainable, but at the same time there's long-term spillover or long-distance spillover. So you could go to Siyu session to look at how the expansion of protected area increase the agri spillover globally. And if we look at these cases and we say, okay, how could we solve this? But we have to see most of the demand are not from local context. They're from urban areas. Just by accounting for 2 to 3% of the land, we have more than 55% of the global population and drive 75% of the global natural resources. However, if you talk to people in cities, they can hardly link their daily choices with what is happening with the endangered species in the wilderness. And that changed when a yellow bittern died in my hands because of the bird window collisions, which is caused by the transparent and reflective glass that we widely applies on the buildings and also the city lighting. And in the US, up to 1 billion birds die annually due to the bird window collision. And what about China? We do not know about that. So in 2022, we initiate the China Anti-Bird Collision Action Alliance, and this time we want the citizen to be the major acting force. So in the past 4 years, more than 5,000 volunteers participate in our survey covering 186 cities and with about 6,000 buildings. And with this kind of citizen science project, actually we engage the public to be part of the solutions. They can identify the problem, go out, collect data, identify which building have problems, and they can use the evidence-based interventions and to change that. And also by doing the implementation, they can use data to evaluate it again. So together with the FLAP in Canada and Let's Out in the States, we have been listed as a way and to solve the bird window collisions. So the solution, one of the solutions is very low cost, just by putting the patterns which are 5 centimeters apart, and then you can reduce the bird collisions. And we support our volunteers and also some large companies to do the retrofitting. But at the same time, because of the huge intention from the public, some local governments react to that by incorporating changes in the policies. For example, Shenzhen and Shanghai have incorporated anti-bird collision into the biodiversity conservation action plans for the next 5 years. And why do we need to care about bird collisions? I always ask myself, because compared to habitat loss and degradation that I've shown before, they seem so trivial. But when a citizen or people from the general public, they see a bird die in front of them, that weight of evidence is more than the number 1 billion. And also it triggers more people to think, are our homes the death traps for other species? Is our development threaten the survival of others? And only by more and more people get engaged with this kind of thoughts, we may have a way and to have a different way to define development and to demand a different way of development. And by then, I think we can create more synergy. With that, thanks everyone. And also I want to say, as the co-editors-in-chief for integrative conservation, we're pushing forward also for the language accessibility. So if you're tired of speaking English and want to practice Mandarin and know more about the journals, we'll be in the booth area. So thank you, everyone.